Welcome to Not Your Ordinary Parts, a podcast where we talk about hard things associated with the human experience with the goal of increasing awareness, growth, and healing. You may hear information from professionally licensed therapists, life coaches, healers, doctors, etc. This information is not medical advice or therapy and is not meant to replace actual therapy or instructions given by a doctor or personal therapist. I'm your host, Jalon Johnson. My guest today is Rosa Shetty. Rosa is a psychotherapist who specializes in helping women heal from complex childhood trauma stemming from sexual abuse. Rosa has advanced training in research-based trauma recovery models, EMDR, havening, sensorimotor psychotherapy, internal family systems, and trauma-focused yoga therapy. And she strongly emphasizes connecting with your inner child, your higher power, and your spirituality to help you on your healing path. So, Rosa, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for being my guest.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I gave a bit of an introduction, but so that the audience can get to know you better, can you give us some background about yourself?
Yeah. So like you said, I'm a mental health therapist. I'm from Los Angeles, Southern California. Um, I'm a mom. I'm a wife. I've been doing therapy, or I've been, a mental health therapist for about 15 years. I've been working with trauma survivors in different capacities, different roles, but most recently, I've been doing my private practice, and I would say and I think you mentioned the sexual abuse survivors as a specialty. That came very naturally. I initially started just working with trauma in general, but over the years, it was just I more women, specifically with sexual trauma, would seek me out for therapy, and it just kind of naturally became one of my specialties. So I've been doing that for many years, and I'm still very, very happy, and I enjoy helping survivors and enjoy working through change and healing and witnessing that transformation and healing.
Thanks. So you specialize in several different modalities. Can you talk a little bit about some of the ones that you use in your practice?
Yes. So I have a very eclectic approach. Primarily, I work with women with sexual trauma that have more what we call complex trauma. So these are complex trauma is repetitive trauma over a long period of time, or exposure to stressful traumatic events over a long period of time. Um, for specifically for we call it CPTSD, complex trauma tends to happen in relationship. So it's what we call relational trauma. So for relational trauma or complex trauma, we can't, it's ideally we can't just work with the narrative, with the story. We have to incorporate the body. We have to incorporate also the traumatic memories that a person has experienced. So EMDR it's a technique that helps patients or clients work through specific traumatic memories that may be stuck in their brain and their nervous system. Sensorimotor psychotherapy is an approach that I use to help patients or clients get work through energy or traumatic memories that may be in the body, and connecting to the body and witnessing the body in a mindful way to see how trauma is stored and how to release it. I also incorporate a lot of yoga, mindfulness, meditation. I'm very because spirituality is such a huge part of my personal journey and my own healing journey. I incorporate a lot of that, not so much. When I say spirituality, I'm including meditation. I'm including helping clients connect with their source, their spiritual background or heritage, and reconnecting and finding strengths within that path to help them heal and recover with what they're going through in the now. Yeah.
Oh, that was a very detailed explanation. So thank you for that. And also, you
Yeah, of
touched
course.
on CPTSD a bit, but I wanted to see if maybe you could go in a little bit more on what complex trauma is.
Yeah. So trauma, let's start with with the very basic definition of trauma. And I think Gabor Mate has been doing his rounds in social media and has shared this definition that I very much abide by. And it's the idea that trauma is not so much what happens to you, but is what happens within you as a result of what you experience. So it is about how your mind, your body, your nervous system, and even your soul, how it responds, how it activates as a result of a traumatic event. And that could be anything, right? It could be a car accident, getting bitten by a dog, at a young age. So single events can be traumatizing. And then there's folks that experience an accumulation of events. So not only were they perhaps in a car accident at 15, but then at 3, one of their parents left the home and there was abandonment, or maybe there's a lot of neglect. And on top of that, maybe at the age of 7, there was some sexual trauma, or, so it's a compounding. Sometimes it's not across a lifetime, across childhood per se. It could be from the age of 0 to 5 being in an abusive, violent home. And then at 5, maybe the perpetrator left the house, but because of the age and the nature of what happened, it develops into this, what we call complicated relational trauma. And so relational trauma tends to happen, like I mentioned earlier, in the relation with the person that is supposed to take care of you, the person that should be there for you to protect you, nurture, love, and support. And for a lot of children, that is not that doesn't happen, or they don't receive certain things that they need to. So it's not how should I say it? It's not about what happens, but it's about what doesn't happen for them, what they didn't get growing up. So whether that is, like I said, the attention and the validation that they needed, and the attention, or anything from not being fed and being left to fend for themselves at a very young age in terms of food or shelter. So complex trauma stems from a repetition of events that are very traumatizing, overwhelming for our nervous system over a specific period of time. Complex trauma doesn't only happen in childhood. Of course, people that have that live in violent homes with violent partners, that are exposed to I would say to war, or especially like what's going on now, just in the world, the prolonged exposure to war can definitely trigger CPTSD for veterans that do 2-3 tours. That could definitely trigger CPTSD. So anything that you experience for too long, too much for too long, can just leave our nervous system, our mind and body and spirit with an inability to just bounce back. We can't just go back to how things were, and that's the trauma. That's the complicated trauma.
Mm. You're clearly well versed in it. It seemed like you could have spoke for a good minute about that, but you gave a
Thank you.
you gave a good explanation, and I think too much for too long is like the short answer, right? And also, it's not about the event so much as how the event happened inside of you, which is, when you really think about that, it's really deep. So when some of these things happen to us at a young age, that could be referred to as inner child trauma. So what is inner child trauma and inner child work?
Yeah, one thing that I didn't mention, let me just go back for a little bit before I go into inner child work. So for people of color, sometimes these things are even compounded with the systemic and cultural oppression and racism that we experience. So, and that in and of itself is another layer of trauma. So when we talk about complex trauma, we're really talking about layers upon layers. And for folks of color, it could be even more dense in terms of the nature of what they're working with and healing. Okay, but
Okay.
now going on to the inner child work, the way I perceive inner child work and the way I present it to my clients, it really, we're working with trauma. We all have an inner child, and but not, depending on our experiences growing up, not, we're not all traumatized as children, right? There's folks that had a, they had a good upbringing, they have supportive loving parents that protected them and did the best that they could, right? But we all have an inner child. For those that have childhood trauma, that have sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, that their inner child will hold those memories and will hold those experiences and will be triggered and will come to the forefront when our life experience in the now as an adult um, elicits that response. So when we say inner child as a trauma therapist, I'm really talking about the specific memories and difficulties that a person experienced at that age. So the reason why I feel that inner child work is a good, it's a good way to introduce someone to healing trauma, because it's a more gentle approach. When we can see our past traumas and wounds represented by our inner child, inevitably for most people it brings up a lot of compassion, a lot of self-compassion, and being able to access that is one of the foundational skills or trait that we need to heal from trauma. We need to be able to access our ability to feel compassion for ourselves in order to start healing. So when we present the inner child, when we talk about specific experiences that are going on now, and we connect it to to a little one within, it makes it a lot easier for folks to practice and eventually be able to have a better grasp on accessing their self-compassion.
Okay. So, question: How how would you know if your inner child needs healing, and then how could you connect with your inner child, right? Because some of the things that you mentioned, some of the experiences in childhood could create these memories that we hold on to that are traumatic. So how could you know that your inner child needs healing? Like, because a lot of us, we just think, oh, I had a rough childhood, or I had this, or I had that, but that was normal, right? But what is like some distinctive ways that we can tell that that inner child, is troubled and needs some healing?
Yeah, so the first, I would say the things that are the bigger difficulties, anxiety, sadness, if you're having flashbacks of moments from your childhood, difficult moments. So basically, if you're struggling with your mental health and you know as an adult that this stems from a specific difficulty, the relationship that you had with your parent or the relationship that you had growing up with someone important, if you cognitively know this happened to me as a child, and you can make that link, because being able to make a connection to your past with your present behavior, a lot of us can do that. A lot of us understand how, okay, well, I have, let's say I get angry when my partner says certain things, and that's because it reminds me of, let's say my mom or my dad growing up. A lot of us can make those connections, but a lot of most people are not able to integrate that and heal what is causing these reactions. So if you're noticing certain reactions that you have with certain people, it could even be your boss, that there's something about this person, I don't know what it is, but every time they come to my desk, I feel like a child. I feel like, I feel young. That's an indication that there may be something there that you can explore. And it may not be childhood trauma related, right? It could be something as simple as maybe you had a critical teacher growing up. Maybe your first exposure to the education system was a very mean, kindergarten teacher or first grade teacher, and that left an imprint that, even though you didn't think much of it because it's just school, right? We tend to minimize certain things, but then here you are as an adult in your 30s, and there's this boss that you just you for some reason you can't tolerate, or you can't stand, you don't like. And there's, these are the little cues, the little clues that there may be something there from our past, from our childhood, worth exploring. And then there's also going back to more of the society pressures and the systems of oppression. We all experience that, right? What, if you're a woman, if, of color, or what, all these layers, right, and identities that we hold. And so if we look back at how the implicit biases against women or people of color, where does that come from for me? Doesn't matter how you identify. Where does that come from? Where did this narrative start? How is it affecting me? A lot of times it goes back to childhood. So maybe you had a good childhood with your parents, but there's things now that you're noticing that are affecting relationships. They're affecting, how your career, how you get along with your coworkers. So it requires a lot of self-reflection and awareness and motivation, desire to want to change. Usually it's because there is a difficulty, like I said with the example of a boss. Maybe there's a difficulty there that is a doorway. And for some people, they just need that little doorway to really explore, and then that inevitably could lead to something else, right? Because that's how healing is. Our brain will present us with what we're ready to deal with. So in this moment, this is dealing with the boss is what we're ready to deal with. So we can start there, and you'll be surprised. And I'm talking, for the clients that I work with, sometimes a lot of times they come in not because of the sexual trauma. They come in because they're switching. They feel like they need another job, and they just started this one 2 months ago. And it's like, well, I want to leave again. Why? What's happening? So it's not about the sexual trauma. It's about their work situation and their inability to stay put in one place. So we start with that, with the work issue, and inevitably over time, it leads, or the brain just takes you there to the trauma, to that core wound. So for folks that want to get started with inner child work, perhaps not necessarily with a therapist, maybe they just want to do their own exploration. There's simple meditations and reflections that you can do. But one of the best things that I like to suggest is that the next time you feel triggered, the next time you feel annoyed, maybe at your partner or a boss or your sibling, to notice that reaction, to know, especially if it's something that you feel, well, that was a little too much for given what they said. It didn't warrant that over the top reaction that I had. What is this about? And to allow yourself 5 minutes to go to a quiet place and close your eyes and get in touch with that event, that experience, that interaction that you had with your boss or with your, with your sibling, and to replay that in your mind once again. That could take 30 seconds to a minute, right? And you feel the emotion. And then you ask yourself, how old does this emotion, how old does it feel in here now? How old does it feel now? And if you do that exercise, some days you might get, depending on the person and the situation, some days you might say, oh, this feels like a 3-year-old emotion. It feels like I'm 5 or 7. So then you connect with, okay, so if this feels like a 3-year-old, let me sit with what is it that a 3-year-old is experiencing right now. And you can visualize yourself as a 3-year-old. You can visualize in your mind's eye, connect, or maybe you have a picture and you see yourself as a 3-year-old, or you visualize a 3-year-old in your life, and you connect with that image. And sometimes just holding that image in your mind's eye and the awareness that this emotion feels very young can start opening that door to exploring the world of your inner child.
Well, I love the analogy that you gave about the door, because and also that the brain will start to present you with things when you're ready for it, right? And the more we go back and the more we reflect on these things, that could be maybe what's called the shadow, like our past. So my next question I wanted to ask you is what is the shadow, and how do you do shadow work?
Yeah, so shadow work is a term that was coined by Carl Jung, and basically it was presented at that time as a representation of repressed experiences, repressed emotions deep in the unconscious. But inevitably they come up, but because we're not aware of it, we keep recreating maybe toxic cycles or violent cycles or difficult relationships because we're not aware that it is this repressed shadow part, the part we can't see, being or reenacting this in our behalf. So part of shadow work is coming into touch with what is it that I'm not aware of. What is it that the conditioning or the programming that I've been that I've received throughout my life, that it maybe is almost like blinders, that is not allowing me to fully see the extent of my involvement with X and Y situation or person. So really shadow is that part that within yourself. And we can also, for some people that they'd like to see their shadow also as a child. Sometimes their shadow feels very young and immature. Sometimes their shadow feels very much their equals. So you can play with that, especially if you work with a therapist. A lot of times we use these terms to help patients have a visual representation of more of the psychic patterns that we engage in, because sometimes when we say it in these terms, because of the mainstream mainstream media and social media and all that, a lot of us are familiar with these terms. So it makes it a little bit easier to help our patients access these deeper rooted difficulties that can be operating in the background that they may not even realize it, right? Especially, when it comes to shadow work, a lot of times I see it in the intimate relationships. So the more intimate the relationship, the more what I call these blinders, the more these are on, right? Because the intimate relationships as adults mimic in our brain the relationship that we had with our caregivers growing up. So as human beings, we have a need to attach, and as children or babies and children, we that need is filled by the caregivers or our parents. As adults, we eventually move on and have relationships, good or bad, toxic or healthy, but we still have that need to attach, and that attachment need is fulfilled by our partner. Like I said, it doesn't matter the quality, but we have that, right? So when we're aware of our shadow, it makes it a little bit easier to work through the patterns from our childhood that could be impacting or affecting our relationships as adults.
Okay, so something that you mentioned, you said that when we start to notice the patterns and um, we may see that a response wasn't appropriate, or it didn't match, the situation, we can take a few moments and reflect back and try and think of how old that emotion is, or does it feel childlike, right? So if we are able to reflect and take a few moments and get curious with the emotion or the feeling and connect with it, how do we then start to move those stuck emotions, or how do we get them to flow so that when we do have a response, it won't be the 5-year-old part of us or the 9-year-old part of us or the traumatized child in us responding?
Yeah, so really, you're describing healing, right? When we start healing these parts, and we start healing from our the difficulties of our past, we're able to navigate life in an easier way. So we're not just reacting; we're actually taking our time and taking things in and being present and being mindful. So for folks that are maybe want to get started with this, if you're in therapy, of course, and that's part of the work that you do in therapy. But if you're not and you want to get started with this, I would encourage to connect with your inner child every day for at least I say 21 days, for at least 3 weeks, and to start opening that door more and more. Because what happens the first time you do it, you might notice, okay, this is interesting, or perhaps some people feel a lot of emotion. Some people feel very sad when they do this for the first time. So eventually, what you want to do is want to start practicing this ability to pause when we are triggered. A lot of times, we just react and we just say, and we engage, and then we regret it because maybe we didn't say, or we didn't say what we really needed to say. We just yelled, or we just got into a confrontation, whatever it may be, right? So healing allows us to be more present, to be more mindful, and to be able to not react, but be able to pause, and to reflect on what to do next, and how to, perhaps instead of yelling and screaming, you can be assertive, and you can set boundaries, and so that's what healing brings our the ability to stay present, to stay mindful, especially in triggering situations. Because the reality is that just because we're doing the healing work, and we're taking care of ourselves, and reading all the books, and practicing all the meditation, and doing all the therapy, for a lot of people, if you have difficult parents, your parents aren't necessarily going to go, that's not going to change, right? If you come from a difficult background in regards to your family dynamics, or siblings relationships, or you have a difficult marriage, or that's not going to necessarily it can, but we can't control people, right? So we can only work through, and build ourselves, and give ourselves the resources, and the tools, and the skills that we need to navigate life, because life will continue to happen. People will continue to remind us of past experiences that are very triggering. But the difference is that when we are doing the healing work, and we're taking care of ourselves, and building our toolkit, and resources, we're able to respond to these situations in a way that honors who we are, that honors our journey, our healing, that respects boundaries, and not just your boundaries, but people can know. You can also respect other people's boundary, and they know how to respond to you. You're able to have healthier relationships in general, because of your ability to navigate this when you're doing this healing work, versus just kind of being basically you know I don't want to say victim, but when we don't take charge of and build our toolkit and resources, we are if anything happens today, then there we go, right? We go down this spiral, and it's like, no, you can't. There are tools and there are strategies, so you don't have to go down that spiral because you had a negative interaction at work. You can actually have that negative interaction and have a pause, and lean back on your tools and your strategies that you've gathered, whether spirituality, mental health, wherever they come from. You can lean on those to help you continue on with that particular day. I don't know if that answered
Sure.
your question.
It
I
did.
went off on a tangent.
100%.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah.
1,000%. Okay, so speaking about healing, right? What are some traditional healing modalities and healing practices? And also, I wanted you to talk about IFS, if you could include it with this, because IFS to me was a game changer, and doing parts work, it really took healing to a whole nother level. So if you want to talk about what traditional methods of healing are, and then if you could just talk a little teeny bit about IFS.
Yeah, so for me, the traditional healing methods that I incorporate, I always go back to the clients that I work with and what they're comfortable with, and I also bring in what I've been able to study and learn, and what I've been given. So for me, when I talk about that, I'm talking really about spiritual practices. I'm talking about incorporating yoga. And I'm talking about incorporating the concept of the breath, and movement, and energy, and being able to use these, whether I'm incorporating that in the session, or whether I'm referring out to acupuncture, or whether I'm encouraging or recommending, and Reiki, a form of energy healing. I'm not a Reiki practitioner, but I know someone that is, and sometimes I say, I think for you this might be worth trying. For others that have more of a Christian background, I recommend reconnecting to that church community, because when they were connected to that, they felt good every week. They came out of that service feeling empowered and feeling grounded and feeling like they can take on the next week. So whatever it is, I like to build on that as a strength. Whatever it is for my client, I like to build that as a strength. And naturally, because I identify more spiritual. I don't have a specific religion. Uh, I tend to, a lot of people that I work with, they find me because I do yoga and they want to connect through that and with their spirituality. So we go there with meditation and the breath, a lot of breath work. That is actually very spiritual. Meditation is a very much spiritual journey, that is very connected also to healing from trauma. Um, a key element in healing from trauma, or the healing journey, is the ability to stay present. I mentioned that earlier. Mindfulness is huge. By definition, for folks with PTSD or CPTSD, by definition, uh, people have a hard time staying present. We're constantly hijacked by the past, our memories, our intrusive thoughts. So the being able to stay mindful and present is in and of itself an indication that you are healing. And that may look so simple, but it's so hard to do, to be able to stay present, um, in whether it's just getting through your day, staying present while you're playing with your children. That is a huge milestone for folks to be able to do. And that is a very much, it can be both. It's a mental health strategy, and it's also it can be a very powerful spiritual practice, right? When we think about prayer, when we think about, for Catholic folks that use a rosary, that's a form of meditation. It's just a different way to call it. But it's powerful, and it's essential. I feel it is essential to the healing journey. Yeah, there was a second part to your question. Sorry, I missed it.
It was IFS, but
Oh,
I wanted to,
mhm.
before we got into
Yeah,
that, I wanted to ask a question, right? Because you said staying present is difficult, and what I wanted to ask was, can staying or attempting to stay present be triggering? Because being mindful and feeling your feelings, that may be uncomfortable, and it may be that uncomfortableness that people run from, and that may be why they can't stay present. So I wanted to get your thoughts on
yeah.
that.
Oh, absolutely. Especially for folks with complex trauma. Um, Meditation initially is very, very overwhelming and very difficult to do, because by definition, when we are in a state of, when we've been functioning in a state of survival, when we dissociate, we are, the present moment is so overwhelming, because that's what we've learned, that it is numbing and it is soothing to be elsewhere, whether that is mentally, whether that is, to physically remove yourself and just go to a different, but being in the present moment with what we have is very, very difficult and very triggering. So, and this is, I'm talking about folks with a lot of trauma, with a lot of unresolved, complicated trauma, uh, with dissociative tendencies. It is very difficult to stay present. That's by definition, that's what it is. Being traumatized, living with a traumatized brain, by definition, is our inability to stay in the present moment.
Wow, I was unaware of that, but that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
So much sense.
Yeah, and which is why, going back to what you brought up, internal family systems, and these approaches that help you stay connected, stay grounded. So with internal family systems, and even with EMDR, we're really, what we're doing as a therapist, we're helping our patients practice staying present while we are talking about very upsetting, triggering things, whether that is traumatic memory, whether that is a big fight that we have with our spouse, we're practicing. Okay, let's talk about this. Let's reprocess this memory. I'm talking about EMDR. Let's see, and then let's see what's going on in your body. Where are you experiencing that in this moment? How does that feel like? What is that? Is there a voice to it? Is there an age? Is there a sound? What is, so we're having one foot in the present while while
Mhm.
we really are re-experiencing parts of our past. And that's why it is, since we're talking about therapy, it is very important to not be afraid to get help for this, because it is not an easy thing to do, to be able to practice this skill, because it is a skill. So sorry, there's an ambulance passing by and it's pretty loud.
No worries.
um, but it is a skill that over time it gets easier. So what we're practicing in therapy is really being able to deal with an overwhelming experience in the outside of the therapy room, right, in the real world, whether it's a trigger, whether it's a nightmare, whether it is whatever it may be, traffic, right? We're really practicing that, building our tolerance for these things that are part of life. But for trauma survivors, it can something as simple as just sitting through traffic, because trauma, for a lot of people, is inescapable, can be very triggering, right? So sometimes we don't think about these moments, and why we, for certain people, sitting through traffic is overwhelming, and it leaves them completely wiped out for the rest of the day. When we look at their experience, especially with trauma, feeling stuck, feeling like they can't move, feeling like, you know, then it makes sense, right? So what we're really doing is being able to help our clients build that tolerance for these day-to-day frustrations, and that's healing in and of itself. That's how the healing starts happening. um, and I'm just talking about it within the therapy room, and then transferring that skill to your day-to-day life, the ability to stay present even when things are overwhelming, even when things are stressful, like sitting through traffic, to not dissociate, to not lash out, to stay with it, with the frustration that, yeah, traffic is annoying, traffic is frustrating, and it feels like it's never going to end. But it doesn't mean that you can't, it doesn't mean that you can't escape this. It doesn't mean that you're completely vulnerable and exposed, whatever it is that you're experience for trauma survivors that they experience. They can navigate that, they can deal with that traffic and not be hijacked by their past experiences in childhood, or whenever it happened.
I like the term hijack that you used, because it really can be your nervous system getting hijacked. Now, you said something that I want to talk about, and it's kind of a little off topic from healing, but it's sort of in the same ballpark. But you mentioned something about not being able to control other people or other people's responses. And I think that a lot of time for people who are trauma survivors, control and having what may seem like maybe the illusion of control can give safety, right? But also, we can't control anything outside of just a few things, like our responses, what we do, what we say, things of that nature. So, what can happen when we try to control other people's emotions or responses, or just anything that's outside of our own power to control?
I feel that for trauma survivors, that happens. It happens, right? Especially if, as the further removed you are from the event, and in terms of time, um, a lot of people cope by controlling what they can in their environment, whether that is people, or their children, or their spouse. But inevitably, it becomes almost like uh, a self-defeating process, right? Because it's like there it's in one part is, I know I can't control it completely, and that frustrates me, but it makes me want to control it even more. So it becomes this vicious cycle of this power and control dynamic internally. right? Not to mention, of course, the difficulties that can result, between two people that are having this dynamic, unless the other person is completely passive and completely okay with giving full control to their other person, which rarely happens, of course. It becomes very difficult relationship, but the internal conflict is even worse, right? If you think about someone that, a person that is a perfectionist, and the perfectionist, and I'm not saying for all people that identify as perfectionists, but they tend to be very critical towards others, but they're even more critical, 100 times more within themselves, towards themselves. So the same thing happens with when we're trying to control someone, and we feel that, okay, we're almost there, but if they could only now do X, Y, and Z, then we'll be good. And then of course that doesn't happen, or something else instead happens, and then it's that inner turmoil and frustration, and it feels very, very difficult. Almost, if you can, to give a visual, the internal struggle can mimic what a tantrum would look like for a 3-year-old. That internal struggle, or the inability to really to know that you can't, or to know that that is not okay, but yet internally just feels so hard to let go. There's a part that just holds on to what the ideal version is that you think, and it is very, very difficult, very hurtful to the person that is wanting to control, um, with regards to their self-esteem, their sense of control, and really, empowerment in their own life, right? Because if you feel that your sense of power comes from what you can control, or the behavior of others, then it leaves you pretty vulnerable, to feeling in control yourself, or empowered in your life, right? Because everything depends. It depends. You're depending on someone else's behavior to feel in control, and that's of course very, very difficult. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That could be a loop that you can't get out of, because if you're depending on someone else to
Mm-hmm.
feel safe, or to feel in, quote unquote control, you're never going to be
Right.
able to control that person, or you're never going to be able to control their feelings, their emotions, etc. So it's going to just keep you in that loop of, feeling like you're crazy, because you're depending on someone else in a way that is
Yeah,
unmanageable to
absolutely.
yourself.
And I
Right.
like,
So,
so have you heard of dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT? It focuses on distress tolerance.
mhm.
I like that approach for folks that have a really hard time, managing these difficult emotions that come up when things don't go their particular way. Um, and borderline personality tendencies are very difficult for folks, and the behaviors that come with that tend to be very difficult to break that, in terms of the pattern. So I like the that approach, because it really helps to build your tolerance for difficulties, whether it's in relationship, whether it's just day-to-day difficulties. It helps to detach from a specific outcome, and it just allows more flexibility in mental strength, which is what a lot of folks, it's a skill that a lot of folks just, we don't have, and it's something that can be learned, which is a good thing, right? We can learn to build our internal, response or tolerance for certain stressors, certain people's behaviors. Yeah.
Right. I think building that tolerance is one of the biggest parts of healing, because you're building tolerance to being uncomfortable. You're building tolerance to uncertainty. You're building tolerance to so many things that in the moment can trigger you, or, make you take you out of your body, and just put you in a place of distress. So to be able to sit in that discomfort and be okay is where the healing can
Yeah.
really start to
Yeah.
begin.
Absolutely. 1000%. Yeah.
Okay. So I want to ask you another question about trauma. What is intergenerational trauma, and how
Yeah.
can it
So
be healed?
intergenerational trauma is, so what the idea is, that what our parents or grandparents experience in regards to trauma or difficulties, it impacts the next generations, whether that is through specific behaviors that are passed on, specific ideas, legacies, mental, psychic legacies that get passed on, or with the genetics and the gene expression of the offspring. And I think the most common example of that would be with Holocaust survivors, which there's been a lot of research that, for Holocaust survivors, there's certain gene expressions that leave them more predisposed to depression, to PTSD, trauma, anxiety, and so forth. So what we're really looking at is the legacy of trauma can transcend generations, and especially when it goes untreated, unhealed. So for example, let's say a grandparent was a war veteran, and they came back from war, and they, because of the trauma and the PTSD, they they became heavy drinkers and maybe involved with drugs. Those children grew up now in that environment. That the war had nothing to do with them, but the effects of the war, the trauma, the imprints of that on their father left them with that exposure, right? So let's say the father, because of the alcoholism, or there's violence in the home, then these children are witnessing the violence. Then these children grow up, and they had nothing to do with the war. Now they're adults, they have their own children. Those children have nothing to do with that, but because of the trauma that their parent experienced, living in a violent home with substance abuse, and now the father maybe has now anxiety related to that and never really addressed that, or maybe there's also trauma because of the violence that they witnessed. So then these children, now the father is, let's say, anxious and depressed, and maybe they're trying to make the best that they can. They go to work, but they come back, and because of their anxiety, dad or mom, they end up yelling at the children. And then so this is a legacy. Right now we're talking about a third generation that had nothing to do with the war that happened in the 60s or 70s, but they're still very much experiencing the effects of that war. And that's the transmission of trauma. That's the generational transmission of trauma that we work with. And a lot of times for folks in therapy, that want to start healing, a lot of times they're healing that through their own lived experience. They're really healing these parts, these legacies that they've been burdened with. And now here they are with an opportunity to finally break that pattern, so it doesn't continue on to their children, or at least not to the same extent that they experienced it. Yeah.
Well, I really like those examples that you gave, and it made it easy to understand how trauma can be passed down from generation to generation, even though the generations that may be experiencing it had nothing to do with, the initial causes of
Yeah.
the trauma. So that was a great explanation.
What I just described, that we call that intergenerational transmission. There's also a term called transgenerational, and transgenerational is a term that transgenerational transmission of trauma is a term that tends to look at more of the collective difficulties. So, for example, the difficulties that are passed on to the women in the family, or to the boys in the family, or to the difficulties that get passed on to certain roles or certain identities within a family system. And a lot of times these stem from society and from generation after generation, experiencing oppression or experiencing difficulties. But they can land in an individual and manifest in very similar ways, in terms of leaving us predisposed to anxiety and to trauma, and leaving us feeling vulnerable and not understanding where this is coming from, especially if your lived experience does not correlate with the symptoms, the severity of symptoms that you're having.
That makes sense. And, I love the term lived experience, because it gives so much clarity to what actually happened versus what may be happening later on because of it, right? So if if your lived experience was traumatic, now there's reasons for you to be anxious or to have, PTSD or other symptoms. So you can never discredit someone's lived experience. So I love hearing that term, and I love using it because it gives so much clout to the reasons. There could be behaviors, but lived experience will dictate the reasons why. So I like to use that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So can trauma ever really be fully healed?
You know, I think there's parts of the trauma that are going to be a journey, I have patients that or clients that I worked with, and we do a lot of healing work and very good work, and maybe we're in treatment for a year or two, and then at some point they feel, I think I'm okay. I think the difficulty that I was addressing, I feel I understand where it comes from. I have the resources, I have the tools, and I think I can navigate this. And they're we end treatment. Sometimes I recommend, it looks like you're doing well. We can terminate. And a lot of times what happens is that maybe 2-3 years later they come back because there's a change. Maybe they had a baby, or they got married, or there's a they graduated from a program, and now, so life, what the way I like to see it is that when something so impactful happens to you, especially when you're young, especially from those early years, it is inevitable that it will impact in different ways and in different intensities throughout your life. But it won't always be the same, especially if you're doing the healing work. You have the resources, you have the support that within yourself to lean back to. But I feel that the triggers will be there, and it doesn't mean you're not healed. It means that life is just giving you an opportunity to continue on this journey. For me, in my own personal journey, I've done a lot of work in healing some of the things that I experienced growing up. But when I became a mom, I things that I thought I had worked through being a new mom triggered a lot of this, and it led me to a path of wanting to ask questions, find out certain things, and then that opened the door to something else. And then I went back to therapy, and I realized that there were parts of myself, parts of my own trauma that I had. Again, going back to that shadow part and the blinders, I had blinders on. I had worked on other things, other parts of the trauma, because remember, the trauma is not about the events that happen. It's about how it impacted your mind, your heart, your body, your spirit, your soul. So there's parts of the trauma that can be triggered in different ways. So now, being, this age that I am, and having the resources and the experience that I have in my life, I can lean back on that. But then it also led me to a journey of, tapping into other spiritual paths. And I at some point I had a therapist, and I also went to see a shaman that did this ceremony called soul retrieval, and that was very powerful. I had never experienced that, and I felt a powerful shift spiritually within me. I think that it doesn't mean that I didn't heal, from the things that, or have not healed from things that happened when I was 6 or 7, but I'm still very much on this journey. And I think as long as I'm alive, I'm going to continue on this path, because it could only get better, right? The more you take care of yourself. And it doesn't always mean to be in therapy. Like I said, it could mean just picking up a hobby that you find so fulfilling, and that it just leaves you like in awe of, like, wow, I really enjoyed crocheting or painting, whatever it is. And here I am, 45 years old, picking up this new that I never knew was so enjoyable. And there you are. That's healing in action. That's you healing in a different, so healing takes different forms. So I think that as long as you are committed to that process, as long as you stay present with your life and what you're going through, I think life will continue giving you opportunities to continue improving and healing. Again, that word, but it's really expanding. It's really growth, really. because that's just, I think that's just life. But when we have the intention to heal, it's even more powerful, right? To pick up, let's say you start painting for the first time, and you have this idea of your inner child, and you're painting, and you feel, oh, I feel like I feel like I'm connecting to that inner child, that creativity, versus just painting in and of itself without the intention. So the intention really matters. So when you've been doing the healing work, sometimes you give it a different meaning, a different intention to this, to an activity, and that is what expands your healing and growth.
That was really deep and beautiful. And thank you for incorporating your
Yeah,
personal
of course.
experience. And since you did that, I wanted to ask another personal question, and that is, what has been your experience as a Latin female therapist helping other people of color to heal their trauma?
Yeah, one of the things that comes up, it's been, I would say, to be completely honest, it's been a journey. I think the starting my career, 15 years ago, or even in college, I didn't have a lot of models or a lot of role models of people, other therapists that looked like me. I think I dealt with a lot of imposter syndrome, but at the same time, being very aware that representation matters. A lot of my clients are are women of color, so I knew at a very young age that it is important to be that I belong in this field. There's a reason why I'm here, um, and but it was navigating that, and even with that that feeling of like, who do I think, who do you think you are, talking to myself, who am I to really be here, to be licensed, have a private practice, like, really, like, you don't know anything, so navigating that journey, um, with the awareness that, also the mental awareness that, no, I do know what I'm doing. I've done a lot of training. Um, there's not a lot of us doing this work. Maybe we think there are because we see it in social media, but social media is such a small percentage of what is out there in terms of people doing the work, people of color doing the work to help others. So really, we don't have enough people of color working with our communities. Um, so we need more of us doing this work, because people connect with those that look like them. That's just human nature. We gravitate towards those that feel familiar, that feel comforting, and there's an element of that when we know that, when they look like them, or they look like someone we know that's very close, whether it's a family member, and it just, we feel that connection, and that connection a lot of times comes with with um, with our background and heritage and language, the language that we speak. And so for me, it's been a process of reclamation, a process of being constant reminding myself that I do belong, and that I need to be here, because people are relying and looking for those that look like them. And I'm, and I'm, my heritage my parents are from Mexico. So, and I speak Spanish. So for me, it was like, I need to be, for me, it has been very important to be able to provide the work that I do in Spanish, and to be able to offer trauma therapy in Spanish was one of my primary, I would say, motivations to continue, because we don't have enough of this specialized field in Spanish, in Espanol, that's what it has meant for me. I don't know if you can relate to this, but that imposter syndrome, oh my goodness, like every once in a while, if I get an invitation to something, or somebody says, it comes up, talking about parts, there's definitely a part of me that does not, that feels a sense of imposter, and every once in a while it pops up still, and that's something that I've learned to navigate, but it's very much there. Yeah.
Mm. Well, thank you so much for choosing to continue to serve your community. I think that, being able to have someone that looks like you, that speaks your language, that has the heritage, is very important. And I'm sure that the clients that you have helped on their healing journey, and maybe someone who might listen to this podcast or watch this podcast and say, wow, I didn't know that I could have someone, with my same background who could help me. So I'm grateful
Oh,
for
thank
you.
you.
I'm sure your community is grateful for you, and keep
And
doing what you're doing.
likewise, I think what you're doing here in this podcast, this space, I think is so important. Yeah, and there's not enough.
I
Yeah,
1000%. Thank you for that. But I was gonna say I 1000% can identify with the imposter syndrome, because there's days where I'm just like, dude, nobody cares about
yeah,
what you're doing. Like, what? Who do you think you
yeah,
are? Like the same way you said it. So I think that's just
yeah,
part of being human and having
yeah,
trauma that we
yeah.
experience. So,
I think
but
I
I'll keep
was
going if you keep going.
watching J Lo's documentary on Netflix, and she was talking about like she feels like an imposter sometimes, and Oprah was talking about it, and I'm like, oh
Wow.
my goodness. So yes, it's very much a human issue, right? That we have to navigate, and for for some people is a little bit, there's more layers to it, right? For some of us, but yeah, very much.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So last question. If you could encourage someone who may be on the fence about going to therapy or talking to someone about their big feelings or emotions, and getting curious about what healing really is,
Yeah,
what would you say
I
to
would
them?
say if there is a hesitation to do it, to give to give yourself permission to try it, to give yourself permission to start the research, to find someone that you feel comfortable, and to just try it without um, the obligation that if I start, it's all or nothing, right? Like if I started, then that means I have to continue. No, you don't. You can have one session and see how it goes. You can join a group. Sometimes people prefer that group dynamic, group therapy. Sometimes people talk to their pastor or their spiritual leader, and that feels very therapeutic. Or actually, some pastors have dual degrees, and so my point is that to just try it in whatever way you feel comfortable, whether it's talking to a spiritual leader, or doing therapy with one-on-one or in group, but to give yourself the opportunity to be in a healing relationship, because trauma happens in isolation. Trauma happens when we are, or at least it feels that we are left to fend for ourselves. We're on our own, and most of the time, we feel incredibly alone in that experience. And so when we give ourselves permission to connect, to get help from someone, to be in that healing relationship, that relationship in and of itself, it can be the healing factor for you. It may not even be about what you share. It's just being in that compassionate, empathic dynamic with a person that is there to help you, right? It's different than just talking to a friend. A friend is a friend, right? That's not the same. It's not the same, right? It can be very helpful, but when you look for a therapist, you're really looking for someone to sit through the discomfort with you, to navigate and re-experience things that you went through, but in relationship with a healthy, really now with a healthier person to navigate this. You're not alone. We can rehash certain things, but you don't have to do it by yourself. You don't have to do it alone.
Wow, that was really, really, really good advice. And I just want to say thank you so much for this. Thank you for um, the work that you did to get here, for working through the imposter syndrome, for servicing your community,
Thank you.
for wanting to
Yes.
make a difference for people who look like you, for trying to heal, the trauma from your ancestors and give somebody else the opportunity to do that too. So this has been great.
Oh, thank
And
you.
it's
Thank you for your kind
very
words. I
evident that
appreciate it. Thank you.
hmm, it's easy. It's easy to say because it's evident that you know what you're talking about and that you've done the work. So I appreciate your
Thank
time.
you. Yeah. And thank you
If
for
someone wanted
having
to,
me, for
to
inviting me.
oh, thank you. Thank you for saying yes. If someone wanted to find you online or on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. I'm pretty active on Instagram. Just my name, Rosa Shetty. I have a podcast called Inner Healing Paths, which is you can find it anywhere, Apple or Spotify. Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much on all social media just with my name, and mostly I would say on Instagram. It's where if you want to connect or send me a DM, that's how I keep in touch with folks.
Okay, great. All right, Rosa. Well, again, thank you so much for this. Thank you for what you do, how you do it, and for who you are.
Thank you. Have a good day.